Hello, everyone, and welcome into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, October 31st around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start talking about that big-time game over there in Happy Valley. We'll get into Ohio State at Penn State in the very first segment. Going to be a huge one, and definitely one that Ohio State very badly needs, and we'll get into that first. Then we'll get into a couple other Big Ten games. We'll jump into Oregon at Michigan, Indiana at Michigan State, a couple of undefeated teams that are going on the road in the state of Michigan. Could get a little bit sketchy for those two. Definitely want to break those down. Then we'll get into the AP Top 11s. Weirdly, this kind of grouped together pretty nicely. We'll get to Texas Tech, Iowa State, as well as Louisville heading over to Clemson for a huge ACC matchup. See if Clemson's that real team that we've seen the last couple of weeks, or more towards that team we saw in week 1. Then we'll get into the top 10 teams in the country. We'll just break down what I want to see from them. Less about schematics, but a little bit about that. More about just the energy of that team going into this weekend. And then we'll finish it. We'll do a little bit of a whip around to all the other games. We'll talk about that Ole Miss-Arkansas game. Very, very interesting one as Ole Miss gets ready for that huge matchup against Georgia. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show. And the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can add click on that $sign first, add any question, comment you'd like. Your name and question will pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive as we head down what is going to be a crazy November, but want to let you guys have your say in the show, so utilize that whenever you would like. And also the gsmcpodcast.net page is up and running, does the exact same thing. So either one of those you'd like to use, please do. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, because it is a huge one over there in Happy Valley this upcoming weekend, and there is a ton at stake in this one, because you have a Penn State team, undefeated, playing really, really good football, ranked above Ohio State going into this game, not favored, but is ranked above them, and is in a position where, if they're going to beat them, this might be the year to do it. There's so much of an opening for them to possibly knock off Ohio State in this game. The Ohio State offensive line is in a really weird place, and Penn State has the problem behind the offensive line. Who's going to start at quarterback is a huge question in this game, but for Ohio State, you need that run game. You're not going to win a title. You're not going to do the things that you pretty much have to do this year if you don't get that run game going. So that offensive line needs to start getting pushed. They need to start getting a little bit more creative, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But Penn State allows a little under 200 yards passing per game. It's got to be the ground game. It's got to be finding a way to get Travion Henderson, get Quinshon Judkins going, and if it's not, then Penn State's probably going to be able to take advantage of a couple of Will Howard mistakes, and this one's going to get ugly in a hurry. But on the other side, I think Penn State's kind of a confusing team, because you look forward to this upcoming weekend. You could have Bo Pribula, who is played really, really good football, no doubt about that, and I think he would be more than fine. I technically think they could win with both quarterbacks. The question I have is, what is the approach with each quarterback? You know, if it's Drew Aller walking out there, are they going to attack this back end a little bit more? Are they going to try to push the ball downfield the way Oregon did? Or is it a ground and pound approach regardless of who's at quarterback? I would assume that would be the way that it would go if Pribula was in there. I don't know what it would be with Aller, because the Ohio State back end has shown to have some openings in it. Can you take advantage of those, and do you want Drew Aller in the game if you're going to take advantage of those? So it's one of those things that, depending on which quarterback lines up under center, you could have an entirely different game plan. You know, you have this pro-style, very polished, stand-up quarterback like Drew Aller, and then you kind of have that Trace McSorley 2.0 and Bo Pribula, very talented, very run-oriented player, still can make the passes that he needs to make, but maybe not against a back end as talented as Ohio State. So whichever quarterback trots out there first for Penn State will probably tell you a lot about the plan going into this game for Penn State, and then we'll see how long the leash is, one way or the other. With a lot of the injuries, we'll see how close to 100% Drew Aller is. A lot of things going into this game for Penn State at the position where you'd rather not have a question going into this game, to be totally fair. But regardless of what happens on the quarterback position for Penn State and the Ohio State offensive line, this game is about defense. It is going to be about defense, and it's going to be about the run game in particular. Both defenses are top 6 in the country in rush defense. Both are top 30 rush offenses. So they're going to get after each other. It's going to be one of those games where if you get down into the red zone and can't turn it into 7, you turn it into 3, you might have a problem on your hands, because you have another team coming back the other way with probably the two best running back duos in the country in this game. They could just walk down the field, score a touchdown, and then you're in a really tough spot. So it's going to be fascinating to watch. I know Penn State fans badly wanted this one at night. Not getting it there is definitely very tough. Obviously, we'd have a little bit more juice in that building if it was at 8 p.m. instead of at noon. But at the end of the day, they're going to be ready to roll for this game. I have no doubt about that. People will adjust their sleeping schedules, probably starting today, to find a way to get up early, get ready to roll, and probably get a little too hydrated, quote unquote, and then hit into the stadium and get crazy. No doubt about that. But for the CFP, as bad as Ohio State needs this win, there's so many different things that go into this. And for the CFP, Ohio State pretty much needs to win this one. Now, I do think a 10-2 Ohio State, if they run the rest of the way, Penn State, Oregon meet in the Big Ten title and they move on, I think they'd get in. I have very little doubt about that. I don't necessarily think that's too much up for debate just because they're Ohio State. We know how good they are. But at the end of the day, you have 2 losses heading into that Indiana game, not where you want to be by any means. And if you're Penn State, you win this game, you move on to the Big Ten title, you were firmly in a position to either get that 4, 3, or probably 2 seed, to be fair. You're in favor to get maybe that 1 or 2 seed, and then if you don't get that, you're getting that 5 or 6 seed, which we've talked about on here. I don't think is better than the 1 or 2 seed, but it's pretty close. It's definitely one that you're going to be in a really good position for, so this is everything for Penn State. And we'll talk about it more tomorrow when we break down the team and pressure, or the coach under the most pressure, but at the end of the day, this one's going to be special. It's going to be right up there with Alabama, Georgia, right up there with Georgia, Texas. The athletes on this field are going to be otherworldly. I think there'll probably be at least about 20 NFL players that play on Saturday, and probably more than that. It's absolutely ridiculous the amount of talent on either sideline, and we'll see which one can get it done. But a couple of players to watch. Got a little ahead of myself. But TreVeyon Henderson is someone that just has to have a big game for Ohio State, mostly because when you look at Quinshon Judkins, fantastic player, no doubt about that. What he loves to do is get downhill. He loves to run inside zone. He loves to run duo and find a way to get downhill and then make guys miss that way. TreVeyon Henderson's a little bit more of a dynamic back. I'm not saying that Quinshon Judkins isn't capable of that. They both will have to play a part in this. But TreVeyon Henderson, a little bit more of that receiving back, a little bit more of that back that you can toss the ball to, get him on the outside, and hopefully make a play in space on an outside zone or on a pitch play or something like that. And I think that puts them in a much better position against a defensive line that should be able to eat up your offensive line. So they're going to have to get a guy like TreVeyon Henderson, just get him the ball out in space, whether that's a pitch or a screen or what have you. He's going to have to get the ball in space because then he can make some really special things happen, and you don't necessarily have to create an offense outside of this offensive line. You just have to get the ball to your playmaker and let him go make a play. And then on the defensive side, Sonny Styles is massive in this game because he's going to get the assignment that every linebacker in the country is terrified to get right about now, which is guarding Tyler Warren. He is going to be on that man, I don't want to say most of the snaps, but plenty of them. He is used to be a DB, is now a linebacker, is a little bit more physical, but also has that cover ability. He might be one of the best players in the country at guarding this player. I don't know if he has enough to do it, at least for the entire 4 quarters. Tyler Warren is such a tough guard. He's such a physical, tough player that can go up and make athletic plays. It's going to be a matchup that's going to be one to watch. If they keep Tyler Warren out of this game, at least mostly, there's almost no chance that Penn State's able to get this one done. And then you got Harrison Wallace, a pass catcher for Penn State that started the year incredibly fast. He looked like he was going to be a runaway wide receiver 1, was going to lead this team in yards pretty much every single week. Didn't end up happening. He's taken a little bit of a step back, still a very talented player. And when you look at this game with Ohio State, when you have so many incredible athletes all over the field for Ohio State, the only way you're going to be able to beat them is stress them in a number of different directions. The only way you're going to be able to beat them is make them think about all 11 guys on the field. They can't just be thinking about Tyler Warren and the 2 running backs. They can't just be thinking about the quarterback in the backfield. You have to find a way to get Harrison Wallace going, to get Omari Evans going, to get Julian Fleming going. You have to be able to stretch out this defense, or they're going to be able to key in on your run game and Tyler Warren, and you're not going to have a shot. And then you got Danny Dennis Sutton, a really ridiculous defensive tackle for Penn State. And when you talk about this Ohio State team, the problems are up front. If you can find a way to get to this quarterback, if you can find a way to blow up this run game the same way that Nebraska did, you have the talent on offense to win that game where Nebraska didn't. So it's going to be a really fascinating game, and Danny Dennis Sutton is going to have plenty to say about this game on Saturday. But moving on to keys of the game, I think for Ohio State, you got to find the quarterback run game. You're not going to get out of this game just running downhill, inside, outside zone, and hoping that your offensive line is going to handle this defensive line. it is a very tough defensive line. What you're going to have to do is make sure that they can't just immediately start moving forward. They have to sit there, think for a second, make sure that Will Howard does not have the ball, and then they can attack, because that totally changes the equation. Even if it's a half a second that you're keeping those guys standing still, you're winning that down. So you have to find the quarterback run game. You have to get just creative in the run in general, because this D-line is going to, at least for the most of the night, is going to beat your offensive line. You have to find a way to get out on the edge, make these defensive linemen confused, and not let them just impose their will pretty much all day. And then you got to trust your back end. I think you look at this Penn State team, they have the ability to stretch the ball downfield. Drew Aller obviously has that passing ability. Thing is, these wide receivers are not going to stress you the same way Oregon's are. They absolutely can find plays downfield, but I don't necessarily think you have to outright, drop a ton of guys in coverage to stop that. I think you trust your guys on the back end, stop the run first, top priority, and then say, if this quarterback's going to beat us with 40-yard throws, so be it. But at the end of the day, I do think this back end's going to be more than fine handling these DBs, and then the front end just got to do their job against the run. And then finally, play out from in front, because you're going into a really, really tough atmosphere. You're going into an atmosphere with a lot of quarterback questions, a lot of fans that understand the history of this game. If you give them a reason to quit on this game early, they might just. You might just have a little of ability to take a little bit of juice out of that crowd, and then you're running away with this game. So get out in front, score that first touchdown, take first blood, and then be out there and have Penn State players and fans all alike, and James Franklin likely, questioning if this is the same exact thing that they've seen the last couple of years. And then you got to go over to Penn State, and I think the biggest thing is trust your QBs. You have very, very talented players at quarterback, although they're very different players. Drew Aller and Beau Paribula are very, very talented guys, and both can go win you this game. They can't win you this game if you are calling this game very conservatively. They can't win this game if you're just going to run the ball and then take a couple of shots from time to time. You got to unleash these guys. As scary of a thought as that is, you sometimes just have to unleash guys, because there's no world where Penn State doesn't win this if their quarterback is not making plays downfield with his arm. So they're going to have to make plays. They're going to have to be able to really go out there and kind of rip it. Can't do that if you don't give them the play calls to perform that. So definitely going to be something to watch. I think you just got to trust whatever guy you're trotting out there and let the game plan be the game plan. And then get the crowd involved early. I just talked about it. This crowd wants a win. They understand the rivalry and the history of this game. It could very well be that you lose them very early on. You have to get them involved early. You have to go out there, try to score early, try to score first, and then this crowd's going to get involved, and then it's going to be an outright nightmare for Will Howard to deal with. And then keep these wide receivers in front. That's really just the reality for pretty much everyone that plays Ohio State. This run game is very, very good, and it's definitely something you're going to have to worry about. Your defensive line is really talented. They should have the ability to win that matchup against the O-line. Your job is to avoid the big plays. Your job is to make Ohio State earn every single down that they get, and then at some point, you got to assume Will Howard throwing into tight windows is going to make a mistake. It might not come very easily, but it's probably going to come at some point, and then that might be all the opening that you need. But it's going to be an incredible game. Cannot wait for this one to break down, but I like Ohio State. I'm going with my gut on this one. I've talked myself in and out of this pick about a million different times, but I'm just going to go with the team that I think needs it more. I think they have their back up against the wall. I think they're going to be ready to roll, and for whatever reason, Ryan Day is able to get it done against Penn State and just about no one else. So I'll take Ohio State. I feel pretty good about that pick. I do think it's going to be a really back and forth, very weird game, and whoever comes out of it firmly on their way to the Big Ten title, possibly against the team that we're about to talk about here in a second, or both the teams that we're about to talk about here in a second. We'll get into Oregon at Michigan as well as Indiana at Michigan State right after this, so stick with us.